What's up, it's Cinema Shogun here, and unfortunately the Bob Saget case is closed. But that hasn't stopped several medical experts from speaking out and voicing their concerns about his autopsy and about the investigation into his death. In fact, one of these experts has gone so far as to say that he believes they need to exhume Bob Saget's body, conduct a second autopsy on his body, and possibly reopen the investigation. A renowned forensic expert is calling for Bob Saget's body to be exhumed after he and several pathologists raised questions about his accidental death and autopsy. Renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Cyril Wecht says that if Saget's family agrees, he thinks a second autopsy should be conducted, along with a full-on investigation into the actor's movements and activities before he died. Now, I'll come out and say it right away. I don't believe this is going to happen. They've already gone so far as to block just the details about his death, just the details from his autopsy from coming out. So I highly doubt that they would want a second autopsy. Now, if this was a normal situation, I don't want to say anything wrong about Bob Saget's family, but I'll just say this. If this was a normal family and their loved one passed away mysteriously and there was a lot of questions around their death, then normally I believe that they would push for more questions. They would push for a further investigation. They would push for a second autopsy. Because at the end of the day, how does that hurt anything? Maybe everything will still come back to it being, oh, this is an accident. But at the very least, you will have people looking into it a little bit closer. And if that's someone that you love, that you lost, wouldn't you want those answers? Wouldn't you want them, to do them justice just in case there was some foul play involved? But that's not the case here. So if they got the details from the autopsy blocked off, you can go ahead and bet your ass they're not going to agree to digging up his body out of the ground and, conducting a second autopsy. And no, they obviously don't want a full-on investigation, because if they did, they would have been pushing for it instead of pushing for making all of this information impossible to obtain. So instead of looking for more information, they're trying to block the little bit of information that there is surrounding his death from coming out. So they're totally working against all of this. All of these injuries, fractures, and areas of hemorrhage could not have been sustained by one fall, he said. I am just very surprised that the medical examiner attributed it to one fall. There is no way this could have occurred with one fall, which I think is important to note, that the autopsy doesn't even say that this was multiple falls. The autopsy says that this was just one fall, but his skull is fractured, and broken in different places. And it's just, we've already gone over this 1,000 times. It's basically impossible. What happened to Bob Saget is basically impossible from just falling over. Yes, you can fall over and hit your head and die. I get it. But you have to look at the injuries. I mean, there's just so many different injuries to his head. It looks like there were several blows to his head. Now, could he have fallen multiple times? Of course. I know, and I've pointed it out, that what they're going to try to do now is they're going to try to pretend like he was suffering from all of these different diseases that he wasn't really suffering from, and that he was battling these hidden medical issues, when we know that's BS. This guy was on tour hours and hours a day on stage, performing in front of people, hours and hours a day, driving himself to and from these gigs. This guy wasn't suffering from those type of ailments that would make him have seizures and hit his head multiple times on the ground. That's not something that he was suffering from. Yet going forward, they're going to try to put that out there. I'm warning you guys about that now. Do not believe that bogus BS. He added that the first autopsy is not a bad autopsy. I'm not being critical, but what I am being critical of is attributing everything, all of the injuries, to one fall. I would like to see that medical examiner and the consultant that he dealt with explain how you get all those injuries from one fall. No way. So he's calling them out. These are his peers. These are other people who work in the same field that he does, And he wants to know from them, how the hell did you come to this conclusion? Because he's saying there's no way possible. There's other people who agree with him. He also basically expressed a lot of the same things that we've already heard from other medical experts, that this looks like it would have been caused from maybe a car accident, a fall from, a tall building, possibly getting your head bashed in repeatedly by a crowbar or a baseball bat. He's basically said all of those things, which we've already heard before from other medical experts. And he's calling the people out who were in charge of the autopsy. He's calling them out, wanting to know how the hell did they come to this conclusion that all of this damage was done by one fall, because that is just impossible. The fracture of the skull does require significant force, things that we would see in a significant fall or of a violent nature, a motor vehicle accident, where the head is moved backward and forward. And he's basically, like I just said, going over all of the different things that would cause this extent of damage. This is a guy who works, for a living on people who've had brain trauma, head trauma, things of that nature. And he's comparing Bob Saget's injuries to the other injuries that he's seen in his career. And he can only compare it to people who have been violently attacked or have gotten in really bad car accidents. And he also noticed that a lot of the significant trauma and the fractures were in the thick parts of the skull. These are the parts of the skull that are that are harder to break, that are harder to fracture, harder to injure, the thicker part of your skull. And that's where most of his injuries are. So that makes it even more unbelievable that he just fell over and hit his head. But basically, he says all of that. And then he said that investigators should retrace Saget's steps before he checked into the hotel, talk to witnesses who may have seen his face at check-in, examine hotel card key usage, and other things of that nature. And was he seen with someone else before going to his room? Now, these are all things that some of which we do know. We do know that several people saw his face before check-in. We do know that he took a picture with one of his fans in the parking lot before walking up to his room. We do know that at the very least he was by himself when he got off the elevator to walk to his room. We do know that they have looked into the key usage of the hotel, and there was only one key swipe. That doesn't mean that Bob Saget didn't have someone with him. That doesn't mean that Bob Saget couldn't have opened the door for someone else, but there was only one key swipe. So the situation is always going to be shady. And at this point, there's nothing that's really changing my mind here. I already thought it was shady almost from square one, of course, once they blocked the details. And then once we found out a few more, a few little things like how the investigators were basically, just call it what it is. It seemed like the investigators were lying to the general public about how he died. And we had to look into his room for ourselves to figure out that, he didn't hit his head on the cushioned headboard and different things of that nature. So I've always already been skeptical about this case. This doesn't make me any more skeptical or any less skeptical, but it does just reaffirm my beliefs in a way, because it's nice to know that I'm not the only one feeling this way. I approach these cases from a common sense point of view. I'm not a medical expert. I'm not a legal expert. I'm just a guy, I'm just chilling. But I do have common sense, which is not so common these days. So when I look into these stories, I just try to approach them from a common sense standpoint. And my common sense tells me that this Bob Saget case is kind of fishy. But it's nice when you hear the experts who do this for a living, who literally do brain surgeries for a living. It's nice when you hear them weigh in and they basically parrot the same thing that you said. They basically reaffirm all of your suspicions because they themselves are suspicious. And it's like so often in cases like us as like the general public, the non-professionals, if you will, like we'll be curious about a case and we'll be really suspicious. And it seems like the professionals always try to explain their way out of it. And they explain things and they break things down in a way that most people wouldn't understand. if they, didn't work in that particular field. And before you know it, you're like lost in the sauce, so you don't really know what's going on. That's what they do often with these criminal cases, because they know people don't really understand a lot of the details about what's going on. So it's nice to see that even from a common sense point of view, I could call it out and you could call it out and say it's fishy. And literal brain surgeons are sitting here saying that it's fishy as well. So that's a first. But I want to know your thoughts about this down in the comments below. While you're down there, hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell, become a channel member today. And if you would like to support the channel, I will always have my Cash App down below if you would like to send a donation. But as always, find some time out of your day to go watch a movie.